Did you know that one of the brightest geniuses in art history created his greatest masterpieces while fleeing a murder warrant? He used his brush for Tenebrism, but he ruled his life with a sword. His name is Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. This is the incredible story of genius and crime, composed of contradictions, like light and darkness. When Caravaggio arrived in Rome in the late 1590s, he encountered the fading idealism of the Renaissance. To him, art wasn't an ornament, but a naked reality, and to reflect this reality, he developed a weapon, Tenebrism. This technique was not merely the use of light and shadow, it was a tool that intensified drama and psychological tension in the painting. Tenebrism wasn't just a technique, it was a philosophical declaration. The majority of his canvases are plunged into absolute darkness. Then, a single blinding beam of light violently strikes the scene. This light wasn't an ordinary window light, it was a divine spotlight. Look at the calling of St. Matthew. The tax collectors at the table are suddenly illuminated, and the hand of Christ extends from the shadow, calling Matthew. Caravaggio transplanted the sacred directly into the middle of a filthy Roman tavern. Who were his heroes? Real people gathered from the streets and taverns. His saints looked like common citizens. He even dared to model the Virgin Mary after a known prostitute. This was a revolution that brought art to the people, but horrified church authorities. The artistic violence of Caravaggio was not limited to the canvas. His life was as dramatic as his art. He was arrogant, quarrelsome, and incredibly dangerous. Police records show he constantly carried a sword and was ready for a duel at the slightest insult. His favorite accessories weren't a brush and palette, but a sword and dagger. He failed to pay his debts, fought with his landlord, and was perpetually on trial. Caravaggio wasn't just a famous artist, he was the most troublesome street ruffian in Rome. And this chaos led to his life's turning point in 1606, murder. A simple quarrel after a tennis match escalated into a deadly brawl. His opponent, Ranuccio Tomassoni, suffered a fatal blow from Caravaggio's blade. The intention, to kill, or merely to wound, it ceased to matter. Caravaggio instantly transformed from a beloved genius under the protection of patrons into a fugitive wanted on the Pope's death warrant. The ensuing flight marked the second, darker act of Caravaggio's life. Naples, Malta, Sicily, a death sentence and the fear of a perpetual fugitive followed him everywhere. Yet, ironically, these years of exile produced his most powerful, most personal work. His later paintings were no longer just dramatic. They were saturated with deep guilt, fear, and despair. Art became his path to penance. David, with the head of Goliath, is the pinnacle of this remorse. The innocent David holds the severed head of Goliath with merciful sorrow, and the head, it is not that of a monster, but Caravaggio's own terrified self-portrait. The artist sent this work as a plea for pardon to the Pope. It is the most powerful documentation of a genius using his art to confess his own sins. He continued painting his own death as he fled. The Crucifixion of St. Peter, although this work belongs to an earlier period, it deals with themes of facing death and atonement for sin. The pain on St. Peter's face foreshadows the deep remorse the artist would experience later in his life. The Crucifixion of St. Andrew, the saint's acceptance of death, parallels Caravaggio's growing resignation to his own fate. The dramatic use of light and shadow reflects his internal conflict between darkness and divine illumination. St. Jerome writing the skull in front of St. Jerome symbolizes Caravaggio's obsessive confrontation with death. Created during his exile, this work expresses his awareness of mortality and his yearning for spiritual purification. The Martyrdom of St. Ursula. This is Caravaggio's final painting, completed shortly before his death. The shock and pain on St. Ursula's face at the moment she is struck symbolize the suddenness of death. Caravaggio included himself in the background on the left, observing the scene like a witness, as if watching his own end. This painting is considered the most direct reflection of the artist's fear of death. In 1610, while sailing back toward Rome, hoping for a pardon that was reportedly on its way, he died mysteriously alone in the coastal town of Porto Orcoli. The curtain on this centuries-old mystery has finally been lifted by modern science. The cause of death was not syphilis. As art historians recorded for years, a team of French and Italian scientists verified the remains in the Porto Ercole cemetery. Through carbon-14 and genetic testing, the research conclusion, it was neither an enemy's blade nor malaria that killed Caravaggio. It was severe blood poisoning sepsis stemming from an infected wound sustained during one of his brawls. His killer was a Staphylococcus bacterium. One more intriguing detail emerged. The lead he frequently used in his paints, while not the direct cause of death, was found to have penetrated his bones. Caravaggio ended the life he ruled by the sword with a wound infection. Caravaggio's legacy, through his Tenebrism, fundamentally changed how we used light and shadow in art. From the Baroque masters to modern photography and cinema, especially film noir, Caravaggio didn't just paint, he spoke through light, and kept his silence through shadow. On his canvas, light was the voice of God, sometimes revealing grace, sometimes guilt. It was the beginning of a new visual language, Chiaroscuro, the eternal dialogue between light and darkness. After him came others, Rubens with his passion, Rembrandt with his light, Gentileschi with her fury. All of them were born from his shadow. But Caravaggio's influence didn't stay on canvas. It came alive again in cinema. In Casablanca, a beam of light cuts through the smoke. In The Godfather, half a face hides in shadow. Each of them carries Caravaggio's legacy. Light no longer just illuminates. It reveals the soul of the character. Today, in every photograph, every film frame, wherever light speaks to shadow, he is still there. Caravaggio's brush has long been still, but his light is still moving. He dared to confront the raw, unvarnished truth of humanity. In his world, saints bleed, heroes falter, and every shadow carries a story. Caravaggio painted without compromise. He did not hide the dirt, the fear, or the violence. His brush turned ordinary faces into profound mirrors of the human soul. Through his daring, he rewrote the rules of art. Beauty could be unsettling, sacred could be profane, and darkness could illuminate more than light ever could. Centuries later, filmmakers and photographers continue to follow his gaze. A shaft of light splitting a smoky room, a half-hidden face under a desk, these are whispers of a painter who never stopped teaching. And now, I leave you with this thought. Can art exist independently of the artist? Can genius emerge from a life of shadows? Look at his work and decide, is it the hand of a criminal or the vision of a master?